Welcome to the podcast, James Wiles. How are you doing, sir?
Great. Yeah,
Good to
doing well today. Thank you.
good to have you here. James, you're a strategic initiatives lead at the Wolfram Institute. You're content creator and technology influencer. You're passionate about software engineering, physics, and philosophy. You have years of entrepreneurial and organizational skills to help achieve institutional goals. And you have the James Wiles podcast on YouTube. You talk to a wide range of innovators and thought leaders across various industries to explore ideas around AI,
hmm
gaining perspectives on how to think about and deal with the future of intelligent systems. Great to
Yep.
have you here. Talk to me a bit about where you work, like the Wolfram Institute. What is it? Who is Stephen Wolfram?
Yeah, sure. So the full name is the Wolfram Institute for Computational Foundations of Science.
Mhm.
And really the idea is that it's a pure research entity that's the spin-off from Wolfram, the company, who for many years has been creating software applications like Mathematica, Wolfram Alpha, etc. So that's really Stephen Wolfram's company, and this is the house that he has been able to build over time in order to do the science he really wants to do outside of having any kind of external influences like you would experience in an academic environment. So he
Yeah.
built the company, and in 2022, during the height of the pandemic, there was a sudden uptick in interest in science online, and that's the moment we decided to create a separate pure science entity, which is the Wolfram Institute. So that's where I'm basically helping to build that out, develop nice projects that make sense for us to find the computational foundations of
Hmm.
in any kind of scientific field, various scientific fields that we're pursuing at the moment. And we're trying to attract young and or talented researchers and scientists who would like to explore this computational paradigm of doing science. So that's really the idea there.
Oh, very good. Very good. And how large is the institute now? How many people do you employ, and do you do collaborations with others?
Yeah. So we're about five full-time fellows at the moment that are doing the research.
Hmm.
And the idea is that we're an institute startup. So we're in the kind of the startup phase of
Yeah.
building a scientific endeavor. And I guess what's unique about our approach is that we're doing somewhat innovative science in the approach that we're taking to make progress there.
Hmm.
But we're also trying to innovate slightly in terms of how science can be done. And that's by having a small, agile institute for doing research. And this is somewhat unique if you were to look at the majority of research, how it's done at the moment, it's in large institutions.
Right.
So we're trying to see if you can apply kind of startup principles to doing basic science, and that's really an experiment that we're just getting off the ground now.
Hmm.
But yeah, we have a lot of interest. There's live science that we do on YouTube almost every week, where you can actually tune in and really live and interactively you can see our fellows doing research and doing science, which is kind of unique. A lot of the times it's behind closed doors and you
Yeah.
don't really get to participate. So this is like we're trying to innovate the process of doing science there.
Oh, cool. Can you provide, James, any kind of examples about how it would um, uh, transfer onto doing science, so to speak? How would
Mhm.
your system or Stephen's system then transfer onto, say, how science is normally done?
Mm. Yeah, I guess one example would be if you take like biology as an example.
Hmm.
So this is something we recently discussed because it's one of the most funded areas if you think about just medicine in general, how much funding
Right.
that attracts in science. So biology is definitely in line with doing research and science that would help medicine and health in general. So the idea was there's lots of angles which you can tackle trying to do science in medicine and biology, but using computation. But the approach, Stephen's kind of paradigm of doing science would be what is the absolute foundational minimal model that is the computational version of what can lead to the same phenomena that you would experience in biology and looking at stuff from very first principles. And this is a different paradigm. A lot of the times people would try to simulate things on computers or try to recreate phenomena that's experienced in the real world using some kind of computational process. But that's a more of a top-down approach. So really the hallmark of Stephen's career and what he's been trying to create this institute for is, can you have a foundational bottom-up approach using the computational paradigm
Hmm.
to actually inform and build intuitions about various scientific directions that could hopefully end up benefiting society. And it's very upstream stuff. This is why it needs to be fundamental research. It's not the kind of thing that a startup can easily pick up and start
Yes.
generating revenue in a year or two. This is the kind of thing where maybe 5 years down the line, there would be a product.
Right, right. And Stephen's background, obviously, in computer science. How did he get his start, and what's
Yeah,
the
look,
background?
his main claim to fame would be a new kind of science. Literally, it's in the name of the book, and
Hmm.
that's a kind of a watershed book for many people that are interested in this world. It has mixed reception in terms of the scientists and researchers whose full-time career is doing research and that kind of thing,
Right.
because at the end of the day, a lot of your opinions about other people's work, almost like art or something that's like more subjective,
Hmm.
is always about the incentive structure with which you hold opinions about people's things. So the incentive structure in academics and creative pursuits, actually, which is an interesting analogy there, is very much talk about your own stuff as much as possible, and pretend everyone else's stuff is like less relevant. But really, I think what makes Stephen interesting and actually has a lot of respect for in startup culture and people that are actually doing hard, real world things is that he is idiosyncratic and does the stuff that he feels he should do, regardless of the incentive structures, regardless of institutional bureaucracy or any kind of directions would that other people would like you to go in a sort of way.
Hmm.
He'll just do what he feels is the best thing to do in pursuit of the purest form of science that he can imagine. And when you're doing groundbreaking science, or let's say science that has the possibility to change the game completely versus incremental science, which you see a lot in the institutions at the moment. It's just like, one paper a year will be a nice steady pace with which I can continue to receive my funding. And if
Hmm.
I solve the problem in 6 months, then that's the end of my tenure or something like that. So that's kind of the incentive structures there help create this ecosystem of incremental science. If you want to just do groundbreaking science and solve various like long-standing issues all at once, you really have to do your own thing completely. And Stephen has wholeheartedly taken that approach, and I think that's the respect he gets in Silicon Valley, is because it's the same thing with startups. You want to solve a problem as quickly as possible, get it to market, and even if it's not fitting the mold of what conventional businesses would have thought you should do back then, the startup approach has proven successful in capitalist world. So can
Hmm.
we do the same thing with science? Mhm.
Hmm. Interesting. I'd been attracted to his work. I'd read this article, this interview he was in which he stated that he thinks we need more philosophers working on big questions
Mm,
around AI. And as a philosopher of science working in the field of AI, of course, my biases agree with him. Uh,
mm.
what are your thoughts on this? Do you tend to agree with him? Do you think there's room for philosophers alongside with scientists in dealing
Yeah,
with AI?
absolutely. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And it's something that we actually discussed quite at length recently at the Wolfram Summer School that happens once a year in Boston in July. And for the first time starting this year, we're actually involving philosophy as a serious track in our summer and winter school programs for people to come and get involved and experience the sciences. And there's various reasons for that. One interesting thing that I didn't expect was talking to a few physicists whose most interesting and groundbreaking research directions were informed by speaking to pure philosophers.
Hmm.
And the idea is there's something about the type of thinking that's required to have philosophical opinions and the maybe the mental exploration that the freedom that that allows
Right.
when combined with somebody that just has to have rigid formalisms to make any kind of progress. That combination allows for sort of magical interactions. So that's something that's interesting. What I did feel for a long time now, basically since LLMs have put AI back in the in the realm of like thinking about this every single day for most people,
Hmm.
is that for the first time in a very long time, and I'm talking like maybe probably a few hundred years, philosophy is important again, more than before, in terms of there is now an opportunity to think about the future where things are going to be fundamentally different, so fundamentally different that we might not be the dominant species on the planet anymore, or we might, have to contend with an intelligence far superior to ours. And in the past, or even to this day, our claim to dominance in the planet and in nature has been our intelligence. That's kind of one of the things that we take as our as our one unique facet. So if we're giving that up, what is our thing anymore? So philosophy will be important to help us think through those things. Technology enables and it progresses, but how do we think about these things in a way that doesn't lead to nihilism and problematic mental states? The philosophies behind science is some of the most important things that we can do. And this is where philosophers can step up and start really meaningfully impact the future direction of not just how to think about stuff, but the actual technology as well.
Mm. Good to know. I've got some sense of job security, though for how long, I'm not sure. Um, you've written about implementing computational law in Wolfram language for governance of AI. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, yeah. So this was the winter school project that basically got me to start being involved with the institute.
Hmm.
And the idea there was taking a different approach to thinking about governance of AI.
Yeah.
And there's various terms you can talk about. You can talk about AI safety, you can talk about AI control, which is one that I'm more leaning to at these days. But every descriptive word that you add to the front or to the back of AI comes with various, sometimes overloaded connotations to various other things. So if you talk about safety, then you need to talk about like bias, you need to talk about
Hmm.
various other things. If you talk about governance, that makes you think about politics and policies and regulations. So um, my different take on how to potentially do these things is not necessarily having governance in AI, but governance of AI.
Mm.
And the idea there is, can you govern AI programmatically? So is there some kind of computational system that will govern the AI without humans having to enforce it in a like an organism to a computer
Right.
way? And the way I thought about doing that was looking at computational law, which is some kind of like logical programming,
Hmm.
which allows whatever inputs you have to go through a process of rules and policies, whatever you want to call it, governance, regulations that result in either permissions or obligations as the end output. And what's unique about the reified input-output language that I use there is that the outputs that you get as the information flows through the system
Hmm.
contains the entire decision tree of how you got to that outcome. So
Mm.
generally in a computer, you have inputs, a whole bunch of mutable processes happen, and you have the outputs.
Right.
And how it necessarily got to the output, you can look at the log stream, you can look at different things to try and figure out what's going on.
Right.
But the output itself doesn't contain the information of how it got to that outcome.
So
And
this is
that's
like
what
a
I've tried
black
to
box
enable.
type of problem, or?
Yeah, I mean, most computers are kind of like black boxes at this point, just the computer itself as a physical device on your computer is literally a black box.
Right.
You type on the keyboard and hopefully the things come out at the end that you want it to. So the idea here is like think of it like a court case. If you're sitting in front of the judge and you have a bunch of facts that you present, you
Yep.
can argue that those would be the input. And then at the end result of the judge or the jury, in the case of the US, would deliberate on or provide the results
Hmm.
of, there would be an accounting of how they got there. So they would say, based on what we found and based on this law and XYZ, these are all the verifications. And even if you wanted to go back and look at the court documents, you can go and see the proceedings. And on
Mm.
appeal, you can go and actually review exactly which steps, maybe there was an error in the coding or the process.
Hmm.
So you have the entire history of how you got there. So this is kind of a different take on maybe explainable AI or symbolic computation. This is saying, let it be a black box. Let it do whatever it's going to do in as optimized um, way as possible,
Hmm.
but have governance on top of it. And this was also something that Leibniz actually was thinking about back in the day already. It was um, like symbolic representation. So can you create law that is computational? And some part of the motivation is we have millennia of development of the laws that we currently use to govern humans.
Right.
So the idea is if we can turn that law into a computational runnable code with
Hmm.
which you can judge computers,
Hmm.
then we don't need to reinvent the wheel with how to get alignment, how to get safety, how to get
Mm.
all these kind of things. Just apply the law to the AI. And I
Hmm.
thought that would like leapfrog a lot of the concerns that people have.
And would this be an internal overview of the AI programs themselves that this law would be kind of, are we using AI to govern AI?
Yeah, so maybe this is one way to think about, and in fact, if you look at the blog, the example I used was a little robotic dog called Fluffy
Hmm.
that was had some inscrutable matrices of how it was going to guard a certain area with
Mm.
its inbuilt taser system,
Yeah.
and how you would how maybe you would say it's done today. If you just train this dog on this robotic dog on a bunch of data of how to do whatever you want to do, then you just let it into the wild. And if it ends up doing something wrong or bad, you have to kind of like go back to the drawing board, retrain it,
Right.
and figure out how you went wrong in the training process. How I thought you could do it is you have an additional layer. So the robot dog is there, it's trained in whatever optimal way you want,
Hmm.
but there's a governance layer on top of it. And at the point where inputs go into the AI,
Hmm.
inputs go into the governance layer as well. The AI is going to determine whatever it wants to action in the world.
Hmm.
And the governance layer is going to determine from the facts of the information that that robot has received, what is the robot or AI actually allowed to do and or should do.
Hmm.
And then once the AI has decided what its course of action should be, it can compare it to the governance layer. And at that point, the governance layer can determine whether it's legal, illegal, or permissible for the AI to do that thing.
Hmm.
So it could be thought of as some kind of like weak to strong process in a way, where you just have a very efficient computational contract that sits above the layer at which the AI can actually act in the world. And this is
Okay.
one way that you can just get the AIs to behave.
Now, I'm going to get just a little technical for our viewers and our listeners. So there's something called instrumental convergence, where
Mhm,
you give an AI an ultimate goal, achieve an ultimate goal.
mhm,
Um, but on its way to achieving that ultimate goal, there are some sub goals that it figures it better do in order to get there that we haven't figured out yet.
mhm,
And some of those sub goals might involve things like um, bribing people to get better
mhm,
resources, or right, being deceptive in
mhm,
ways to appear as though it's complying with these rules, but
mhm,
really it's not. It's got a sub program that says let them think we're doing this, but ultimately we've got to do these little instrumental goals in order to get to the ultimate goal.
mhm.
Will your model be able to identify those and stop a very intelligent system from usurping the very rules that were meant to keep it in line?
Yes, it will do it as well as how the law currently does it for humans.
Hmm.
And I think what you're referring to there is loopholes. So legal loopholes exist all the time and seem to be almost like some kind of incompleteness theorem type issues. You can never plug all the gaps in any legal system,
Yeah.
especially as the world changes and upgrades and even definitions of things change over time.
Hmm.
So really the motivation there is a lot of human hours of effort has been put into figuring out what the laws are that govern very crazy things like humans.
Hmm.
And let's just start with computationally enacting those laws that we have, and then start figuring out how we might need to adjust things to adapt for super fast learning entities or things that can figure out these loopholes in ways that humans could have never envisioned. That's
Hmm.
kind of the motivation there.
Okay.
Mm.
And what about things like recursive self-improvement, the possibility of the emergence of sentience, where
Mhm.
such a being can feel pain or can suffer, that sort of thing. And then even to the level of the emergence of consciousness. Would
Mhm.
any of those factors in any way override this kind of computational law kind of paradigm that you're introducing? Could a
Yeah, there's a
conscious AI say, "Hey,
Mhm.
thanks for the law, James.
Mhm.
Appreciate that, but I'm a million times smarter than you, and
Mhm.
my law now says I should do X." Will that ever become a possibility where it just figures out, "Oh, you put these parameters on me? Well, I don't care. You
Mhm.
are all idiot human beings that don't compare to my level of
Yeah,
intelligence."
so there's a couple things there. So maybe five things. So
Yeah,
there's
I'm sorry.
sentience, consciousness, super
And
intelligence,
suffering.
yeah, suffering, pain, and like kind of like let's say uh, definitions as well is very important in all of those things.
Hmm.
Um, so if we talk about the super intelligence part, which is maybe closely related to risk there, um, the idea of AI being so smart that it can outthink us. So, I mean, this happens all the time already in many ways. And also, what I'd like to maybe make a point of, as have an opportunity to speak to your audience and yourself, is to think about AI as one of the layers with which to reason about the risks of this new paradigm that's upon us.
Hmm.
But really, it's the middle layer. What you have is the advancement of technology, the subset of which is AI, the subset of AI, which is the most new and groundbreaking, that has the biggest potential to upset everything we do, is machine learning,
Hmm.
which is just one subset of AI. So it's kind of important to figure out what we're talking about here. So the concept of super intelligence probably to break that down a little bit more, is that we're faced already, even without thinking about computers, with superintelligences in the form of emergent phenomena in large systems already. So if you think about a nation state versus a tribe of people, I would argue the nation state is a superintelligence to the tribe as a whole, or even just any one individual human.
Hmm.
I would never be able to outsmart the US government, for example, by myself without any kind of interactive help with anybody else. So we're faced with the concept of superintelligence that have removed most, or let's say have an influence on our agency already, which I feel is like kind of what AI risk kind of boils down to at the end of the day, is like loss of autonomy or agency. And there's many things that we've given up that agency for already in favor of having that super intelligence system help us in our individual lives. And the hope there is that we have some kind of fallback mechanism to change it if we don't like that system anymore. And if we were to compare that to how to apply those principles to computers, the very basic thing I would think of there, just based on a very maybe naive approach, is to say, pull the plug. So if you don't like what the AI is doing, stop the energy flow for which it is doing its computation. And we have the advantage there, at least for now, in terms of being embodied with the power of quantum mechanics and general relativity, and actually faced with things that are affected by gravity. We have that edge on AI for now. And how AI can get to super intelligence in an embodied world where it has to contend with traffic and machine guns and all kinds of other things that we still have the dominant ability to control. How it can go from super intelligence in chess to super intelligence to dominating us in a military context. I don't think that's a direct series of steps that can lead there without some intervention from our side. So the hope is just that at those moments of intervention where we can have some kind of say, if we assume that the inevitability is AI will be the dominant system on the planet in every way, is that we would have some kind of way to implement clawbacks to influence its direction. And the simple thing is there's turn it off at moments where you feel like this thing is run a bit wild.
Hmm. I I hope you're right, but there's a nagging feeling in me that says by the time we figured out we should turn this thing off, it's disconnected the turn off button.
So that's the difference between governance of AI and governance in AI,
Hmm.
because and this is also a nice disambiguation is um, what bad people are going to do with AI is something that's a concern. I would squarely put that into the category of just advanced technology in general. What nefarious humans can do with a calculator is a lot worse than what nefarious humans can do without any calculator at all. So, to the degree that it's AI specific, something about artificial intelligence, that is some kind of new risk beyond just the scope of how to govern humans with advanced technology, is something that should be a unique consideration. But yeah, I don't see specifically when we're talking about AI how to differentiate that from generally how we should apply governance to any advanced technology.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I
So
had
it's an interesting concern. I mean, that feels like that should be the realm of like legal scholars, regulators,
yes.
that kind of thing. And as a computer scientist, if I need to know how to program the AI, I don't know at what point that thinking can help me inform what I need to code into my computer in the
Hmm.
development of the AI. So I'd like that. I'd like the thinking to be maybe more directly tangible in those ways. You know, it's like how's it actually going to influence the code I'm writing? That's
Yeah,
kind of the question always at the back of my mind.
right, right.
Mm.
Now, you're in Toronto,
Hmm.
so we have our own kind of godfather of AI here. We have Joshua Bengio, and
Hmm.
he's suggesting that Canada builds a $1 billion public supercomputer basically to keep up with tech companies. Do you see
Yeah.
kind of a runaway with tech companies? Do you think government needs more involvement in terms of uh, interacting with and, first of all, understanding what's going on and then staying in the game with them?
It's like feels like a double-edged sword. I have a idiosyncratic view on the reason why governments tend to be a little bit sloppy
Hmm.
with how we would prefer them to be. And my theory there, which I'm still developing, is that there's some kind of mechanism that keeps government stupid,
Hmm.
so that enough smart people that are not in the government have some kind of way of fixing it if it goes too awry. If the
Right.
government all has the smartest people in it controlling us, then there's no hope of us ever reclaiming power. This is like there's some kind of like interesting theory I have there. So to the degree that government should be involved with AI, it's
Hmm.
kind of the double-edged sword. There's if you like what your government is doing, then potentially yes.
Hmm.
If you think what your government is doing is more of the time incompetent, I
Hmm.
wouldn't want incompetent influences affecting very important technology
Right.
that could be the technology that's going to help us figure out how to mitigate most of these risks. So there's a very double-edged sword there. I guess I would lean towards more of the laissez-faire way of doing things. But even in if you think of it in the economic context of what both good economic practices is it needs some kind of sandboxed environment where you can let the best possible thing emerge
Hmm.
without too much external influence. But that again goes both ways, because the external influence um, needs to benefit those people that are actually developing these things. Um, yeah, but it needs to be protected. So in other words, what you do shouldn't necessarily be able to escape and destroy the world, but
Hmm.
to the same degree as the concerns of those people on the outside that are not actually crafting the thing shouldn't influence the development too much either. And if you can have enough of these sandboxes of just developing the best outcome possible, that is controlled on the periphery, then you
Hmm.
don't have these external incompetent influences affecting the development of the most advanced technology we can think of. And maybe to jump to the biggest analogy here would be in the development of nuclear. It's like, would you want the politicians to be involved in the actual development of how the nuclear bombs should work? I don't know.
Hmm.
What happened in the case with Los Alamos? You know, were they just left to figure out the best possible science possible to achieve the goals that the government set forth, or was the government actually involved? I don't know the details that much, but it's an interesting maybe analogy to compare it to something like that.
Hmm. Now, in racing towards the next level of AI, what's often referred to as AGI, or artificial general intelligence, and then ASI after that, artificial superintelligence. That's why I named the book what I did, Building a God.
Hmm.
Um, Several tech companies are pretty much racing like full steam ahead
Hmm.
on this. Um, do you think AGI is inevitable? Do you think it will be?
Yeah, I think there's many AGI systems that are already
Hmm.
technically AGI. It's just generalized forms of intelligence. I
Hmm.
mean, when I stick images into ChatGPT, it can respond with what's happening in the image, and I can ask it in text to output things, and it's going to have audio soon. I mean, that's kind of like starting to be general.
Hmm.
Somebody that I was listening to recently actually described humans as not being totally general either. Um, and we also only have a subset of fields in which we can deem ourselves to be intelligent,
Right.
but rather unintelligent in other areas. So artificial general intelligence, even that term has a little bit changed over time. I think people were thinking about AGI initially as what's a specific model that was good at chess and then good at Go and then good at Dota and then good at anything that you could throw at it. That's as
Hmm.
kind of like a general thing, but it's escaped that definition to now mean something that is like ChatGPT is going to power the robot that's walking around your house and like helping you with domestic work and stuff. And to the degree that it can be a robot and do your emails for you and I don't know, drive your kids to school. Is that general, or does it need to be more general than that for it to be called
Yeah.
general?
Yeah. It refers to human tasks, right? So
Mm.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So then it would
Um,
be like copying humans. Like maybe
right.
a nice definition there would be at the point that AI can do everything a human can do. How would we think about that world? And maybe that's the definition of AGI that makes sense there.
Hmm.
Yeah. So sorry, what was the question about AGI?
Just do you think it's inevitable? Do you think it's something that these tech companies like Altman and
Mm.
Anthropic and Meta and all these guys, they want to be the first to build this kind of supercomputer because they know they see dollar signs and they see
Yeah, yeah. So
conquest and
I know exactly what you mean. Look, in that context, it's not only AGI is not only a definition, it's also a buzzword.
Mhm.
So when you start talking about startups and the use of buzzwords, that's also like becomes very iffy. So that's the buzzword for the current 3-year vintage of AI startups, but
Mhm.
it'll change eventually. Um, so I feel quite strongly about embodiment as an important perspective on the capabilities of AI.
Okay.
Um, will a computational system be able to do everything a human can? And at a fundamental level, that would be impossible because the definition of a human is at a molecular and atomic level unique. And so there will be something different from a computer being able to do what we can do, or be what we all have exactly the same traits. And
True, but we
that's
we can say
mm,
planes fly, birds
mhm,
fly. Planes
mhm.
just do it way better, right? Faster.
Um, less maneuverable. I mean, I've seen certain things birds can do that the plane is not capable of doing.
Well,
A
what about
bird
what
can
about
land on a
helicopters?
tree. Yeah.
What about human drones that can do all sorts of things? So we'll just get
Yeah,
better
I
and
mean,
better and
like,
better at flying, right? So I'm just wondering, you know, will will AGI just get better and better and better at doing things maybe different from carbon-based individuals, but
yeah, oh yeah, that I mean that seems likely because it's almost though digital media and the
Mhm.
electronic paradigm is able to exploit a niche in the computational universe that seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. So to the degree that this is kind of like open lands with which lots of computationally reducible fruits can still be harvested, seems like it will really accelerate in that world very quickly, faster than what we can, obviously. And it's also maybe the concept that like we have found our ecological niche on the planet for at least a couple 100,000 years now.
Right.
We've formed like a pretty good local minima, at least in terms of the optimization that we have on the planet. I
Hmm.
think computers are very far from that value of optimization that's possible. So it's still going to get very far very quickly. And if these startup companies achieve the definition of AI to the degree that they have the ability to make the definition work for them, then sure. Um, yeah, I think again it depends on it. Yeah, it really depends on the definitions here. Like
Hmm.
uh, artificial superintelligence is interesting. It's like how can we live with a system that can outthink us in at least the medium of computation every way possible? How
Hmm.
would that world look? It's an interesting thought experiment, and we'd have to have some philosophical discussions about that. I think one analogy to look at there is chess. So I
Right.
play a lot of chess, and the degree to which the chess computers now are so much better than the best human players is an interesting thing to consider. And it kind of feels like what's happening there is that the meaningfulness of those computers, as it starts drifting beyond our capability, becomes less meaningful to us. So there's certain things we can glean from what these AIs are doing at that level,
Hmm.
but it's too far away from what we care about at the moment for it to still be as important for us to pay attention to. So I think that kind of thing happens all the time. And assuming that we're the most intelligent thing on the planet is also just an assumption,
Hmm.
depending on the perspective with which you look at things. We're forced to look at things through the observational lens of who we are. But if you were a weather system, you might assume that clouds, which is the analogy Stephen likes to use, is the most intelligent system on the planet. And in a less continued way, you could say that dynamical phenomenological interactions that these weather systems have is the most complex thing that can exist on the planet potentially.
Hmm.
So why is that not super intelligence? It depends on the slice of the Reuliad that you view yourself as an observer as.
Hmm. And in terms of uh, like takeoff times, timelines, things like that, how long do you think before we see a considerably dramatic shift in what's going on with AI now? What's going to be the wow factor where humans are going to say, "Oh my, this has never happened before."
I think the next thing people are looking for on the timeline of AI is domestic robots.
Okay.
I would love for a robot to like wash my dishes for me and do the laundry. Like if it could like do the laundry, put my clothes away, wash the dishes, um, what else? Yeah, like that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
That'll be cool. That'll be the phase shift moment where I'm like, all right, cool. The future is there. Yeah, before that, I'm not sure what the next time is. I think the thing after that would be maybe some kind of like governmental thing
Hmm.
where if you ever watched Neon Genesis Evangelion, they had these three AIs that had this voting mechanism to decide on like the course of certain actions that had to happen. I think mostly in that case as a military context, but you
Hmm.
could think of it in terms of like a governmental context either as well. And depending on the vote, there was like they had their own little personalities and they were slightly different in the decisions that they came up with. That would be like the type of artificial intelligence committee or something that was making informed decisions that humans weren't really allowed to override at scale. So I think the thing is like, can we have autonomous embodied activities in our day-to-day lives? And then the next thing from that is, can we have that? Will it work? Maybe is a better way to say it. Will it work at scale, at like a governmental scale?
Hmm.
And the point at which the government kind of like hands over the, or what do they have these days? I don't know, the White House chair to the AI, or maybe that will never happen,
Hmm.
but they'll and it might be a gradual thing, but to the degree to which it makes sense for us to just hand that over to super advanced intelligence, I think that'll be another phase shift.
Right.
And yeah, the comparison there would be maybe some smaller countries that have less to risk says like it's a no-brainer. We're so full of corruption and incompetency. Let's just get this AI imported from some, tech advanced from like Sony, or I don't know, whoever does like AI the best these days. Like
Yeah.
there's the Sony government 3000, just like plug it in, let it make all the decisions, and then the government does extremely well and the economy starts flourishing and all the people start being happy. I think that'll be a moment where like, oh damn, like are we falling behind if we don't implement this? I mean that's a very optimistic way of looking at it. And
Yeah.
obviously I'm avoiding all of the risks and
You
pitfalls along
are.
the way, but yeah.
And that's good. So that kind of leads into my next question. What do you think are going to be some of the greatest things that we're
Yeah,
going to see in the next 10 years?
next 10 years. Well, the thing that always like pops into my mind, and to take the other side of this very optimistic rant that I went on recently, just now, the other side of the optimism would be like autonomous military
Right.
situations. And you're seeing that now with the war in Ukraine
Hmm.
and drones being this new tool that never really existed before.
Hmm.
And it feels like it's inevitable that drones will start having computer vision and autonomy with which to decide who and when to attack.
Yes. Right.
If you pay attention to what's happening there, a lot of the challenges with the use of drones or their efficacy has been with electronic jamming and latency with which the pilots can decide on what to do, to the point that they're now connecting fiber optic cables to the drones and actually flying them by wire in order to mitigate the electronic jamming.
Hmm.
So to the degree that you can cut the cable and let the AI to like just figure out who the targets are, that's like a phase shift of concern that we should really think
Yeah.
about.
There
And
was there
then,
was an admiral, U.S. Admiral James Stavridis. He's got this novel out that he co-wrote called 1254. That's the year he believes there'll be no humans in the military anymore.
1254.
By 2054,
Okay.
you won't need actual physical humans with guns and flying things. Everything will be automated on the sea, in the air, and on land. So that's
Okay.
the
Well, I mean, my very first gut reaction for that would be great. Stop the killing of people. I mean,
yeah,
wow, if you could fight your battles on effectively a chessboard of robots, if you could have like the robot wars version
right.
of military conquest,
Hmm.
and all that you can get the humans out of the way, that'll be pretty cool. But then obviously the concern there would be, those with that power would just,
That's
be
it.
like in unstoppable.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a risk that we need to consider. I mean, the analogy keeps going back to like what happened with nuclear,
Hmm.
and it's one of the few times where we reached a point where if we did not self-regulate somehow the proliferation of this technology or the willingness to use it, it could have resulted in the end of the world.
Could have.
That was on everyone's minds back then. It
Yeah.
was a little bit before my time, but I think a lot of people from that generation still have a mindset of this being an ever-present part of their lives, ever-present danger during that phase of like the Cold War and that sort of thing. And I think it still affects a lot of policy making, decision making, and um, yeah. So this is maybe something that we'd have to come to grips with again.
Hmm.
And the way to think about it there is like this is the next potential super weapon. I mean, there might be more super weapons again after that that we'd have to contend with and think about. I mean, and then if you were to think about the super weapons before that, maybe biological devastation was kind of the thing that humans had to contend with before, with smallpox and chickenpox and like all these things that had like massive devastational power that some societies could cope with and others couldn't. So from the importance of philosophy to think about these things, I like to look at examples in history. I like to take analogies
Hmm.
to other industries to help build intuitions around this thing. And something I also just wanted to mention, I recently found a rare interview from Andrew McCulloch from back in the day. And what was so profound about, I didn't have a date on it, but he seemed relatively young, like just in terms of after he was very far along with neural networks.
Hmm.
Somebody asked him, is like, how will the AI know to care for these 15 grandchildren here in front of you at the lake house? And he said, well, there's some mechanism in me that makes me want to care for these kids. And for him, that was a neural network, um, some kind of like neural network formulation.
Hmm.
And if there's a mechanism in me, I can put that mechanism into the robot. And that was his fundamental belief. And I think what was just striking about that, whether you agree with that or not, was just that these people who were developing these things 80 years ago were thinking about these things at a very deep level already.
Right.
So all of these concerns around alignment, safety, existential risk, p-doom, accelerationism, thermodynamic gods, I think people have been thinking about this at the dawn of the century, previous century already. So we should
Hmm.
just look at that, and we should look at how humans have developed systems for things before the computational paradigm. Um, yeah, there's examples in history with which humans have figured out how to overcome radical advancements of technology. To the
Mm.
degree that we have had to overcome AI, that's a little bit different. To the degree that we have to figure out how to handle machines that can learn faster than what we are able to learn and adapt. This, I think, is the very specific new thing that we've never had to deal with before.
Right.
A thing that is able to learn faster than us. I think that's something we should hone in on as philosophical thinkers and figure out how to think about that. Even the definition of learning, I don't think is very well established. Like, what is learning fundamentally?
Mm. Mm.
What is the computational minimal model of what learning actually is?
Hmm.
It seems so obvious to us because we've been learning since we were born. It's just like we
It
just learn how to do
does.
things. But
It
what
does.
is learning?
And then you see Sam Altman putting out, uh, basically OpenAI's O1, which can reason now. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, it feels like chain of thought, but to me,
Hmm.
it's my experimentation there. I don't even ask for my opinion, but I was going to give it because I feel like a few people are starting to figure this out now.
Yeah.
It feels like a sloppy implementation of the chain of thought reasoning I was getting the AI to do anyway.
Mm.
I do a lot of prompt engineering, so the kind of stuff I've had to figure out by just what I call LLM thrashing at this point, just like
Hmm.
trying to force the thing to compute. It's kind of like in the olden days where you had to hack on a computer.
Hmm.
It's like we've brought back hacking of AIs where you're just trying to like get the outputs to work.
Right.
It's a way, it's kind of like a shortcut way for people that don't know how to get the LLM to do chain of thought reasoning to
Hmm.
just change a toggle and get it to automatically do the chain of thought for you. I found it's degraded quite greatly the type of output I could get manually, at least for coding tasks.
Mm.
Mhm. Yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm. What is interesting there for me, and I don't know, this maybe is like a different, like kind of like side note,
Hmm.
but there's something that it keeps like triggering me to pay attention to in a weird kind of way. But if you saw the discussion that they had for the O1 release at OpenAI. Uh, there was a video of like the developers and the people that were involved, and they were kind of like sitting around talking about this thing. And I know AI goes for this aesthetic of like very much like a homely kind of like small
Yeah.
scale vibe with like the people just chilling around couches and having all these like high, like
Drinking
supposed to be the
lattes.
most, yeah, like doing the most like advanced AI research possible in like the small like comfort of their living room type
Yeah.
aesthetic. But what struck me there was like half of the engineers they were sitting on the floor talking about
Yeah.
O1. And somehow that feels off to me. Somehow that feels like there's some sociological or otherwise cultural thing that is off with that. And if this is the place where, the most advanced AI research has been done, which affects me every day because I use ChatGPT every single day
Mhm.
and can potentially have self-referential issues with regards to the AI slop that's generated for the internet, which it is itself referencing in its training data. Um, uh, this is the governance in AI, which is more of a pressing issue for me,
Mhm.
is that who are the people and what are their morals and ethics and principles with which the programming of these AIs are being done. This is a
Mhm.
concern for me. I was born in a different continent on the other side of the planet, and the type of ethical, moral, and societal issues that we had to deal with is in many ways fundamentally different to what people in well-developed cities
Mhm.
and states in the US have to contend with. And the type of decision making that we have to make is different to somebody that's living in comfort. So I'm concerned about that, I think,
Mhm.
more than anything else. I'm concerned about at the fundamental stage, when we're just getting these things off the ground, how is the foundations of AI being set up? And you've seen this in technology development already. The foundations of a lot of computer systems was some guy in his 60s at home coding some kind of like pivotal protocol with which the whole of various millions of other stacks of technological development have been resting on these small little moments of fundamental decision making. And like a lot of these things are fine to a point, but they can crack. And I would just like to know and have those things a bit more open,
Mm.
ironically, to scrutiny by the general public. I'd like to know
Right.
what's going into the algorithms that's going to be controlling my life. I'd like to know the decision mechanisms with which these people are going to decide the algorithms. I mean,
Mm.
sorry, I'm going on a long rant
No,
here,
no,
but
no.
I feel strongly about this. It's like the algorithms that decide which YouTube videos are going to appear on my feed, which TikTok videos are going to show next. Why do we not have more control over these things? I
Mm.
feel very strongly about this. Um, to the point that I've got like various accounts that have different feeds.
Mhm.
And if you're chronically online, like some of us are, then you actually start to get a sense for the algorithms to such a degree that the day X or some other social media changes the algorithm of what appears on the feed, you can tell immediately that the algorithm has changed without any
Mm.
announcement, without anything going on. You feel the vibe shift. So if these what seem like a small trivial fact of like let's just adjust the algorithm and push deploy
Mhm.
affects my vibe for the day, I would like a little bit of control over that. I'd like a little bit of openness, or at least um, like a toggling mechanism to have some influence over that. Actually, I'm helping one of our researchers at the moment write a paper on being able to on the fly adjust personalities of LLMs
Mhm.
via uh, a mechanism which will reveal in the paper shortly. But the idea there is instead of pre-prompting an LLM to have a certain personality or that kind of thing, you actually control the weights dynamically. So you could imagine some kind of instance where you're having a chat with the AI and just like being able to slide the toggle of how you would like the AI to
Right.
control its outputs, like kind of like how in the or was it the space movie with TARS? What is the what is that recent
Oh,
movie? Where they travel through wormholes and they're like circling around the
Interstellar?
sun. Yes, okay. Sorry, thanks. So in Interstellar, how you could control the humor level of
Mm.
TARS. It's like, why don't we have that? We should have that.
Not
Yeah.
a bad suggestion. I'll
But for
tell.
all algorithms, I mean, my point
Yeah.
there was it's not just about LN, it's like
No, true.
YouTube algorithms.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, traffic light algorithms. Like I would like some kind of say to control, like, I feel like the algorithm of these streetlights are not perfect, or
Mm,
um, anything. There's
interesting.
algorithms are going to be a more and more influential part of our lives. So I think we should at least open source some of these, or at least put more control of these.
Very good. Very good. All right. In wrapping things up, what are your current and future plans within the organization? What's going to happen next?
Yeah, so right now we're busy in our kind of like scaling up phase.
Hmm.
So we're talking to some influential funders and organizations that are willing to donate to the institute in order to get our research to scale up a little bit.
Okay.
So that's like the most important thing I'm busy with. In terms of research directions, we're interested in the minimal models of a computational foundation for various sciences. The specific fields that we're most interested in at the moment is things like theoretical biology.
Hmm.
We're interested in economics. On the physics side, there's some things we're doing with um, geometry, differential equations. There's the Wolfram Physics project, which is the computational model, which could potentially, upon which you could potentially have all of the science that goes into general relativity and quantum mechanics in one paradigm.
Hmm.
So there's various interesting directions that we're working on there. And then we're working on machine learning as well. And I think the idea with machine learning is to say what is happening at a very fundamental level with machine learning, and
Right.
how can that inform the intuitions with which we approach these things. So like the question of learning, like what is it at a base level to actually learn something? So those are the directions that we're interested in. So yeah, it's exciting journey ahead, and I think the science and the philosophies behind science are going to be more important now than in recent history.
Hmm.
So I feel like this is an important direction with which we need to develop these ideas, the intuitions behind science and the philosophies behind science.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I wish you luck with all that. It's been a pleasure to have you today on the podcast. I appreciate you coming on and telling us your views. Thank you very much.
Okay, it was my pleasure, and yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you.